Welcome, everyone. We are back and better than ever here at the Daily Fantasy Pivot, but we have switched topics now. Instead of talking daily fantasy basketball that we have been talking for the past, I don't know how long, has it been 2 months at this point? I think we've been on air. That might be overselling it. But anyways, since we got on board, we've been talking basketball, but now it is that time of year. It's Cubby season. It is baseball season. Nick's not going to be happy with that comment, but basically it's springtime, and that means we are talking a different sport. I'm getting pumped for it. I've been so deep in the thick of basketball that it hadn't even really crossed my mind, and then we started talking about doing this show, and it was like, oh man, it really is baseball time. Look at everyone got the baseball hats going, so let's get everyone introduced. Let's start with you, Nick. I know I mentioned it's Cubby time. I know you happen to disagree with that. Let everyone know who your allegiance is.
Yeah, I'm a huge Cardinals fan, but I mean, it's hard not to like the Cubs, man. They're stacked.
Yeah, that's kind of how I felt about the Cardinals, when they were good. Anyways, Benny, what's going on? Are you excited for baseball season, or how you feeling?
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm a big basketball fan, but DFS NBA right now is, it's not it's not as fun as it had been. Putting up 300s every night and not cashing anything gets on your nerves after a while. So I'm definitely ready to get into some MLB action here.
I feel like I missed an inside joke here. Everyone just burst out laughing, and I'm the only one sitting here with a straight face. So, Josh, if you want to let me in on what everyone's laughing at, please do.
Yeah, we'll talk about that another day. But basically, the reason why I think I'm laughing is because I have a Cubs hat on, Rick. I didn't think I was supposed to be doing that. The only reason I wanted to have it on is so you wouldn't get mad at me. So we'll just go with that.
Yeah, after we've been going at it all day on Twitter, if you've been following along, it is nice that we've got some harmony here with his Cubs hat, my Chris Bryant T-shirt, who, by the way, is going to win the NL MVP this season. So there's that. But let's get into the basics, because we're here to train people, and frankly, we're here to really tune our schools back up because we've been so focused on basketball. What are let's go with, what are the single most important things that you would tell a first-time daily fantasy baseball player? Maybe just give one piece of advice. Benny, why don't we start with you? That if someone's totally clueless and saying, how do I get started playing this? What would you tell them?
To me, it's all about the matchups. The most important thing every day, you got to look at the pitchers that are on the mound. You got to look at the hitters that are going to be going up against them. You got to try to find, pitchers that are. The difference between season long and daily is, in season long, if you got a stud on your team, like if you got Mike Trout with the first overall pick or Bryce Harper, you're just rolling them out there every day, no matter what the matchup is. And daily, though, we have everybody available to us, so we get to choose every day whether we want to use Harper or Trout or both of them or neither of them. So when you're putting together your team, you really got to look. If you're going out there and taking Trout and not looking at the fact that, they're playing the Dodgers that day and he's going up against Clayton Kershaw, you're not going to have many winning days. You want to find bad pitchers, and you want to take good hitters going up against bad pitchers and good ballparks. If you can do that more often than everybody else, you're going to wind up being a winning player.
Now, Nick, I've heard the saying that for fantasy basketball, you can't win if you don't watch, and for daily fantasy baseball, you can't win if you don't look at the stats. Do you think that's true, and why is this such a stat-driven sport, and which ones do you like to look at?
I mean, I don't know, but I've never heard that saying because I watch every sport. So like, if I'm playing a sport, I'm watching that sport. So, but definitely numbers for baseball. Fangraphs.com is going to be your best friend for fantasy baseball research. So, if you're new to the show, new to fantasy baseball, definitely get on Fangraphs.com because that's where they'll do like 90+% of your research at.
Yeah, Josh, do you want to give like a brief introduction to a few stats that people need to be looking at, if they're playing for the first time, let's say for Sunday's slate, which we're eventually going to get to and go over, which is, 3 games. But what stats do they need to look at for, let's start with hitters. If I'm choosing a hitter versus a pitcher, obviously, we'll look at hey, this looks like a bad pitcher because of his high ERA, but why else would you want to start a hitter against a given pitcher?
The first things that we all think of when we're thinking of batting averages for hitters is of course, that's the main stat you're going to look at. But I think here, and I know Benny will definitely agree as he does the Benny's Bat section for Rotocope.com, which we will see every day all through baseball season. The name and the stat WOBA, weighted on base average, is going to come a lot into your research. This is something you're looking at for hitters. This is something you're looking at for pitchers. So this is a stat you should definitely get familiar with. So I think I have a decent understanding of WOBA, but I know Benny uses it a lot. So Benny, you want to kind of get into detail about WOBA and what it means?
Yeah, I mean, I could talk about this for an hour and a half, and guys that are, big sabermetricians can go a lot deeper into it. But here's basically what you need to understand for daily fantasy purposes. WOBA has been shown to be the most predictive stat to daily fantasy scores. And the reason for that is what WOBA tries to do is the same that, the daily fantasy stats and the companies try to do. What WOBA does is it weights different outcomes that a hitter can have based on which ones are more important. Just like in daily fantasy, in figuring out a player's WOBA, walks are a little bit less than singles are, and singles are less than doubles are, and doubles are more than, doubles are less than triples, and triples are obviously less than home runs. So the higher a player's WOBA is, it's basically how many bases they get per plate appearance. So, obviously if a guy's hitting a lot of home runs, he's going to have a higher WOBA. A guy could also have a high WOBA if he hits a ton of doubles and a ton of triples when he gets up there. But usually it's a stat that basically outlines, the number of bases that a guy gets per plate appearance. So the guys with the higher WOBAs are the ones who are hitting more doubles and triples, which for daily fantasy purposes, those are the things that get us, 5 points instead of, 3 points or 8 points instead of 3 points. And the more of those that you put in your lineup, obviously, the more points you're going to score. The more points you score, the more you're going to win. So WOBA is the most closely correlated stat to daily fantasy performance, and that's why it's the one that we kind of start our research with and do everything off of when we talk about, which hitters that we like on a given day.
Yeah, and the way it's been described to me is it's kind of a better slugging percentage, because slugging tries to weight each hit, but the way it does it is basically a double is twice as important as a single, and then a triple is 3 times, and it's not really an accurate depiction as the way that WOBA does. It tries to give an overall analysis of the hitter, what they do with the plate, and that's why I think it's so great. And there are a bunch of other stats out there that you could use, but I don't know about you guys. I just want to mention one more important stat, the weighted runs created plus. I don't use that so much for hitters as I use it for pitchers playing against a team, because then it shows really how they create runs. I mean, you do care about it for hitters. I mean, you want to see how they manufacture it. If their team's manufacturing more, he'll score more runs, but it's kind of nitpicking. But for pitchers, I mean, you look at the WOBA they allow, it's important, but you look at an offense like the Jays, and they're creating a ton of runs, or maybe even some teams that don't have as much power, and I think that holds more weight for them, because then whether or not you want to start a pitcher against them. Am I on the right track here, Nick, at all?
Yeah, totally. I mean, we could go over a ton of stats that I'm sure we're going to drop a ton of different stat names throughout this season on these watchers. But I mean, one of my favorite stats is probably ISO. I don't know if we've talked about that yet, but ISO is isolated power, and that's just a huge power statistic. I mean, the Blue Jays, you just talked about, Ricky, are a huge power team, and they had 3 dudes in the top 8 in ISO last year, in Bautista, Donaldson, and Edwin Encarnacion. So that's just one of my favorite stats, especially if you're going to try and win a tournament. You want dudes that are going to hit long balls. So that's one of my favorite stats.
Yeah, well, let's actually get into the slate, because we actually have baseball to talk about now, and that's why we're here, which is pretty fantastic. I'm looking at Massey ratings right now, which gives us, an overview of what the Vegas lines may look like. Now, this is just a science professor pretty much guessing, but you look at Mets Royals. 8.5 projected runs versus 6.5 for Cardinals Pirates, and then 8.5 again for Blue Jays and Rays. Now, looking at Vegas lines, I'll start with you, Collacchi. Does that do anything for you? Because I mean, for those of us who have played, we've seen these 10 projected runs that turn into a 1-0 ball game. Do you look at Vegas, and if so, does it confirm what you're thinking, or do you just kind of use it as a detail, and if you don't agree with it, you do your own thing? How do you use Vegas for baseball?
Vegas lines and odds in baseball, to me, are a lot different than what you see in other sports. Of course, in the NFL with football, and of course in the NBA with basketball, you see the spreads and you see over-unders used pretty heavily. But in baseball, there are no spreads. It's all money lines. And what we mean by this is a guy could be, or a team could be a minus 100 favorite, 200, even 300, depending on how heavily weighted they are. And what that means is basically in Vegas, you would have to bet 200 if it's minus 200, $200 to win 100. And that basically indicates that that team is a heavy favorite. In terms of over-under, like you said, that game between the Cardinals and the Pirates has an over-under of 6.5. This heavily indicates that it could be a very low-scoring game, which is obviously great for pitchers. Now, in terms of using Vegas data, I talked about this on a podcast with co-founder of RotoCurve, Michael Rathburn. He has backdated Vegas data for all of last year, and let me tell you, it may be the most correlated bit of data I've ever seen for any daily fantasy sport. So it's definitely something to keep an eye on. The rule of thumb essentially is 8 or higher for hitters and 7 or below for pitchers, and that's a good way to look at it when you're targeting on either side of the plate.
All right, well, taking that into consideration, let's get into the pitchers because that's pretty much the focus of daily fantasy baseball. I think we'll all agree, and maybe we can go through it site by site, maybe at a later time, but basically you want to get pitchers right. I mean, whether or not that's paying up for the top guy of the night, when Kershaw is on the mound, we'll probably debate that. But, we definitely want to focus on, our pitchers first and 2 guys we feel comfortable with. With that being said, this is a 3-game slate. We've got Adam Wainwright versus Francisco Liriano. We've got Marcus Stroman versus Chris Archer. We've got Matt Harvey versus Edinson Volquez. Looking at those, which are the names that stand out to you, Nick, for opening night for maybe a guy you want to use?
Yeah, I know most of you guys probably play on DraftKings. I don't know, me and Collacchi play on FanDuel probably, but on FanDuel you only have to pick 1 pitcher, which is a lot different than DraftKings where you have to pick 2. So on a 3-game slate, you have 6 pitchers to choose from. So I mean, on FanDuel, Francisco Liriano is the guy that's sticking out a lot to me. The Cardinals, I'm a huge Cardinals fan. We know that they struggle badly against lefties. Liriano has a huge swinging strike percentage. I know that he has a high strikeout rate. He walks some guys a little bit, but I'm not too concerned with that. I know the Cardinals could be a patient team, but they don't have a lot of power. I mean, this just sets up perfectly for Liriano. The lowest total of Sunday. I mean, I just think Liriano is the way you got to go on FanDuel.
Collacchi, I'll go to you. I would have to guess that you are on board the Liriano train, but if not, who else? And let's talk DraftKings. Let's assume that Liriano is one of your guys. Who would be your number 2?
Liriano definitely is my number 1. I do want to agree with Nick there. But my number 2 is actually Marcus Stroman. And this is interesting because that means that you get two of these pitchers that don't necessarily cost that much on DraftKings. Of course, the Matt Harveys of the world, even the Wainwrights, and of course Chris Archer are going to cost a lot of your cap. But the 2 guys here that I'm targeting are Liriano and a guy like Marcus Stroman simply because of the matchup. Nick mentioned how the Cardinals struggle against lefties, and that's absolutely true. Last season, the Cardinals were in the bottom 5 in every statistical category that I look at against pitching. Left-handed pitching, they had a 291 WOBA. They had an ISO of about just over 300, or just over 100 rather, not 300. That would be incredible. But just over 100, and they had one of the highest strikeout rates in the game at 24%. And as Nick mentioned, Liriano has one of the highest strikeout rates in the game for a left-handed pitcher at just over 60 or 26%. So that gives these 2 guys an excellent chance to match up. The first guy I mentioned was Liriano, but Stroman, I think, could fly under the radar here because he's going against Chris Archer. A lot of people are going to be looking at the Vegas lines and seeing that Archer is probably going to be heavily favored because he's going to be at home against the Blue Jays, who are a good offense. But I think Archer was only an underdog 4 or 5 times last year, 33 starts. But the Rays cannot hit right-handed pitching. We saw that a lot last year. They had a really high strikeout rate. I think they hit just something like 214 or something like that against righties for most of the year, so that's just terrible. So a guy like Stroman with that offense backing him up, I know they are facing Chris Archer, but that could be an interesting pick there because they will be cheap as compared to some of these other star pitchers.
Now, Benny, are you back with us? You're kind of going in and out of the picture. You got shaken like it's the Blair Witch Project over there. I keep checking in on you to see if you're there or not. It looks like you're back now. So let's go to you. What about Stroman? Because a lot of people assume, when a guy misses an extended period of time that it's an arm issue, but he actually tore his ACL last year, so it was a knee. So being a young pitcher, are we worried about an innings limit? Because we know in daily baseball we want guys that'll go 7 or 8 innings. Being that it was his knee last year, is there not really much concern for his innings limit, at least in Game 1?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to have a concern for anything like an innings limit this early in the season, but I agree 100% with Josh. I think he's going to be underpriced, and he's probably one of the best options we have on the slate. He's got such a good matchup. There's really nobody on Tampa Bay that can hit right-handed pitching. I think their best batter against right-handers is probably Kevin Kiermaier, and he's not really scaring anybody. So I definitely think Stroman is in a good spot. And then, he made a really compelling case for Liriano as well. I think the one thing we could all kind of agree on is, as good a pitcher as Matt Harvey is, we're all probably staying away from all the pitchers in that New York Mets and KC game. Would you guys agree with that? I mean, that's kind of where I'm looking to target my bats at.
Yeah, I would agree with you there. I think Volquez, just not a very good pitcher, at least compared to what else is on the slate. And then you look at, that Royal team, and they just don't strike out. And that's kind of what I was going to allude to here, is if we're talking, a tournament pitcher, I'm on board with you guys. Liriano and Stroman are the 2 names that stand out to me. They just have the best matchups. They're both good pitchers, so I'm not thinking twice. But which way can we go? Because now Matt Harvey faces a team that doesn't strike out very much. Chris Archer faces a Blue Jays team that strikes out a little more against righties than the Royals do, but still not very much. And then we got Adam Wainwright against the Pirates. Do we want to use any of those guys in tournaments? And if so, which one? I'll start with you, Nick.
I'm all about Liriano and probably Archer. I would just go Archer just because I think he can get strikeouts and he's going to get innings. And probably since I play on FanDuel, I think the win is just so important on FanDuel, and I think he can get a win against Stroman. So that's typically why I lean to Liriano too. I think he can get a win on Sunday. So those would probably be my 2 favorite pitchers on the slate.
What about you, Collacchi? Any interest in any of these other guys for tournaments? Or are you pretty much locked on to 2 guys and going with them?
I think Stroman and Liriano are going to be the guys in essentially all my lineups on opening day, except for on FanDuel, like Nick said. I do think on DraftKings it's important to pick those 2 best pitchers, especially in a short slate, because with the discount that you're getting, you're going to be able to do a lot of different things with your hitters. But on FanDuel, with the 1 pitcher opportunity, it's a different situation there. So I think the only guys in those other echelon of pitchers besides Liriano and Stroman I would look at would be Archer because of the strikeouts, but it just scares me that he goes against that Toronto Blue Jays team. So for me, I think I will be just sticking with those 2 guys and just hoping that those other guys don't throw a no-hitter, which they're all very capable of doing.
Benny, do you have any interest at all in Adam Wainwright? Because I feel like he's the only other guy that we haven't really mentioned that could have some use. Maybe the loss of Pedro Alvarez and his strikeouts is preventing us from liking him.
No, I actually do like Wainwright. He would be the other guy that I wanted to talk about here. Other than Andrew McCutcheon, there's really nobody on that Pirates team that does well against right-handed pitching. Now, I have no idea what Wainwright's going to be like. We haven't seen him pitch since, very early in the season last year when he got hurt. But I'm going to be honest with you. Of all the guys that are here, if you had to say to me one of these guys is going to go out and shut down the team that they play and, maybe he'd go 7 innings, have like 5 or 6 strikeouts and not give up a lot of walks and hits, Wainwright's the first name that pops off the page to me before I started looking at stats.
Yeah, I agree with you. His price is down, but I think we're pretty much focusing on the Lirianos and Stromans, if at all possible. But then again, I think most people will with a general understanding of stats, so you could go in a different direction. Let's get to hitters, because we said that we were going to focus on this game with the Royals and the Mets. Let's start with catcher. We don't have to go very long on this. There's not very many options at the catcher position, but is there any that you feel like rostering? Or is this kind of what you would fill out last, Josh, if you were doing a roster and just see what works with the rest of your salary?
Yeah, I think catcher's a position I'm definitely going to be punting in this slate simply because there aren't that many hitters that are attractive with all the talent of the pitching in these 3 games. But the thing about catcher is you're really not going to find much talent for any team. So in a short slate like this, you're not going to have the Buster Posies. You're not going to have the even the Wellington Castillos who have excellent splits. So it's going to be tough to find catchers in this slate because we're looking at guys right now, just the 6: Kurt Casale, Russell Martin, and then we're looking at guys like maybe John Jaso if he's eligible. He would be an interesting option because he's leading off. But the other guys that just aren't necessarily worth playing because the only catcher in a good spot is Yadier Molina. But he struggles with anything besides singles, and he's facing Francisco Liriano, who will probably be my pitcher.
Yeah, I'll open this up to either Nick or Benny here if you want to just talk about catchers at all, because I don't think there's a whole lot on this slate.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I think I saw today that Hank Condra is actually going to start for the Rays, I mean we've seen this dude just hit bombs before when he was with the Astros. I mean he's going to a different ballpark completely, a pitcher's park, but if he's in the lineup, I mean I'll take a shot on Condra if he's in the lineup for sure. He can hit a home run anytime he's at the plate, but if not, John Jaso is probably my guy if he's going to lead off for the Pirates. I mean there's just not much out there.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're gonna spend up on catcher, you're going Russell Martin. He's not in his split advantage. You go Travis d'Arnaud. He's not in his split advantage. So I think this is just pretty ugly on this slate. Benny, is there anything else you want to say about catcher, or should we just move on?
Yeah, I mean, I like Yadier Molina, right-handed batter going up against Liriano. I think he'll be low-owned because I think a lot of people are going to be on Liriano, so I'll have some shares of him in my tournament rosters. And then I actually like Travis d'Arnaud a little bit. I'm going to be attacking Edinson Volquez in that game. He's probably going to have one of the better spots. That's my son for everybody who is crying in the background. Yeah, he's probably going to have one of the better spots of any of the catchers here in the order. He's probably going to be hitting in the 6 hole maybe. So I think it's a pretty good spot for d'Arnaud. So for me, it's probably going to be either Molina or d'Arnaud. Obviously, where I use Liriano, I'm not going to use Yadier. But any place that I decide to go Wainwright, I'm going Wainwright and Yadier in the same lineup.
Well, thanks, Benny, for reporting live from the scene of the show Rugrats, right on the set, Benny. But anyways, let's move on to first base.
Yeah,
I think
we're actually having a little crayon fight right here, and I think my son is losing to the crayons at the moment. So.
Oh, it is quite a scene over there. But let's go to first base because we actually just got some interesting news today that Edwin Encarnacion says he's going to be ready for opening day. And I know it's not a great matchup, but at least when we look at first base, we've got some talent here. There does look like some guys you could spend up on. Who do you like, Collacchi, at first base? I'll start with you.
Lucas Duda, that's my guy at first base. I think that Mets lineup is something you guys should definitely be targeting because, honestly, there isn't that much else to look at. And the thing with Duda and that entire Mets offense is they're facing the only pitcher on the slate that allowed 300 or more WOBA to both sides of the plate. Now, that's not necessarily great, but considering all the other options, he's definitely the one to target, and the guy we're talking about is Volquez. Duda last year had an isolated power of over 225. I think it was 227. So that gives him the chance to hit a home run. He should be hitting in the middle of that Mets order, probably 5th. So it gives him a chance to drive some runs in. And that Mets order this year is a little bit deeper. So it has a chance to score some runs as well with some talent hitting behind him. So the first baseman I'm looking at to start my lineups with is definitely Duda.
Yeah, let's go through that. You mentioned the wobas to both sides. Let's look at the holes on these pitchers. You're right, there isn't a whole lot, but Adam Wainwright allowed 302 for his career to lefties. That's his worst side. Liriano 315 to righties. Both Stroman and Archer have been very good. Then Volquez is weak to both, but besides that, there's not a lot of holes in these pitchers, which makes it difficult. So, Nick, who do you like at first base? Are you going with Duda as well?
Yeah, I'm like Duda for sure, but for tournaments, I kind of like Eric Hosmer a little bit. I know early in the season last year, Matt Harvey was getting lit up for some home runs, and maybe he'll go through the same issue this year. So maybe I can pick on him and get a home run. And I know it's supposed to be warm in Kansas City this weekend as well. I know I was just looking at the forecast before it came on. It's supposed to be like 70 degrees on Sunday, so the ball could be flying a little bit better, especially for early in the season when it's supposed to be like 37, I think, in Pittsburgh. So I would play Hosmer in tournaments, but Duda is definitely my cash option at first base.
Yeah, I love that Hosmer call. I've got the injury report right here. Matt Harvey's actually been dealing with a blood clot in his bladder, and he was questionable to make opening day. It looks like he's going to now, but he might not be 100%. So I know people are just assuming that, Matt Harvey, ace, whatever. This is a pretty good offense he's facing that doesn't strike out, and that's kind of his strength. So if he can't strike them out and they're going to make contact, I love Hosmer for tournaments. Benny, what are you doing at first base? We've mentioned Duda, we've mentioned Hosmer. What else you got for us?
Anybody talk about Kendrys Morales yet?
Not yet.
Okay, I mean, I actually like him. We thought we were supposed to be getting a utility spot on DraftKings at least in the outfield spot, and it seems like there's still 3 outfield spots. So you're going to have to make a choice at first base between Hosmer and Kendrys Morales in this game, and I think most people are going to go the Hosmer route. So if you're looking for something it's only a 3-game slate, so you're going to need some things to differentiate your roster. I think going to Morales over Hosmer at the first base spot is a way that you can do that. And he actually hits pretty well against right-handed pitching. He had a 385 WOBA, 254 ISO number, so he has some power. He does get on base, and he does get hits. I think he could do just as well. I don't hate Hosmer either. I think both of those guys are definitely in play. But, I'm going to have some shares of Morales as well in my rosters.
Yeah, I literally think the only other option you can talk about, it looks like Biscotti qualifies at first now against Liriano. There was a guy who had his splits favor facing lefties, so I think he's a nice little hitter for them. But Edwin Encarnacion's the only other name that I think is a monster tournament option. As long as he's healthy, and he's facing Archer, who's very good, but we know that Encarnacion can launch a bomb basically anytime he's on the field. That Blue Jays offense, they're facing maybe the toughest pitcher on the slate, but if they get hot, they can beat anyone. And I'm sure there will be plenty of Blue Jays stacks, even with Archer on the mound in tournaments. So Edwin Encarnacion in the middle of that. But I agree with you. Duda is my cash first baseman. I think Hosmer's even my preferred tournament guy over Encarnacion, but I don't think we can get away without mentioning, the Blue Jays middle of the order, even on a small slate. Let's move to second base. It's ugly.
We can go to third. Just go to third. We don't need second.
Go ahead, Nick.
But does anyone know if Logan Morrison's going to be starting at first base for the Rays or not? Because I'm not positive on that.
I thought I saw that he was, to be honest with you. I thought I saw that Morrison had made that. Let me double check for you. His competition is Pierce, so I think it's a designated hitter.
Yeah, he should be batting sixth, the thing that I have here, but you never know until those lineups are official.
Yeah, he's probably going to be in because he's a lefty going up against Stroman. He'll be in.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention him for tournaments, but I don't know if you're going to even need to pay down just because there's not a lot of dudes to even pay up for. But on FanDuel, he's a first baseman, and he definitely hit the ball against righties pretty decently last year up in Seattle. 329 WOBA, 203 ISO. Those aren't like earth-shattering numbers, but he's definitely in play, I would say.
Yeah, I agree with you. Let's go to second. I know we don't really want to talk about it. I'm looking at the options here. Forsythe not against the lefty. Neil Walker in what is probably going to be our favorite stack of the night. Colton Wong's a lefty-lefty. So really, what is there to like other than Neil Walker? I'll start with you, Benny.
Yeah, I mean, Neil Walker's probably the chalk. He's the one who sticks out the most with the right splits matchup and everything there. The other guy I'm looking at a little bit is Josh Harrison. I think Harrison going up against Wainwright could be in a pretty good spot. He's a guy that's actually had some good history against Wainwright for anybody who's a supporter of BVP, which is an argument we can have another time. It'll take up too much of the show. But I think that he's in a decent spot here as well. But yeah, I mean, I agree with the other guy. This is an ugly position. So I think for cash, you go Neil Walker. That's probably your safest play. If you're looking for something that might be a little more off the board and have some upside, I like Harrison as that guy in tournaments.
Let's go to you, Nick. Anything else you got for us at second base? It is pretty ugly.
% agree with Benny.
There you go. Collacchi, anything else you got for us, or should we move on?
No, it's awful. It's so bad. Second base is just so dreadful. I can't even. Just play Neil Walker, 100% ownership. That's fine.
Well, let's move on to third base then, because this was an argument we were having before the show, or not even an argument, just a discussion about Matt Carpenter, how we loved him last year against righties, but now it's Matt Carpenter lefty-lefty. Do we have any interest in him in this? And if so, why? And what else do we like, Collacchi? Let's start with you, since you didn't get anything in about second base.
Well, Matt Carpenter used to play second base, and honestly, I wish he was still at that position for this slate, because I probably would even use him against a lefty. But the thing about Matt Carpenter is, I'm going to use a quote from Benny he said before the show. Matt Carpenter is the Paul Millsap of MLB DFS, and honestly, he means that to the 100th power, and I agree with him. This guy's just been incredibly consistent, and even against tough pitchers, he tends to do well as well. But my thing at third base is, considering that that's a position that you normally need some pop from, I'm not necessarily sure I'm going to go in that direction on this slate.
Okay, so if you're not going in that direction, who else? Who gives us some pop at third base? Is the obvious answer Josh Donaldson?
Well, the thing with Donaldson is he, of course, has some of the most amazing numbers we've ever seen against lefties. He was also really good against righties as well. But that Chris Archer slider is really scaring me, especially for a guy like Donaldson that has that big leg kick. If he doesn't get a fastball right in his zone, it could be a really ugly day for him. So at third base, some of the guys that I'm looking at are actually David Wright against Edinson Volquez if he does play. I think he's questionable for opening day right now, but if he does play, he should be hitting second. And in that lineup, I hate to beat a dead horse, but all the Mets right now for opening day.
What about you, Nick? Got any other ideas? Maybe a Mike Moustakas?
Yeah, I mean, Moustakas caught my eye a little bit, but I had a bunch of salary left over when I was building lineups on FanDuel because there's just not a lot to pay up for. So I just went with the power and plugged in Donaldson. I don't love the matchups for any third baseman really, but I'll just take the power upside and hope for a home run,
Yeah, this is kind of a brutal slate, honestly. This is a weird one to start on where there's not a whole lot to say. But let's go to you, Benny. Maybe you got something to say, at least more than I do at this position.
Yeah, well, depending on the site, I mean, on sites where Donaldson is not much more expensive than anybody else, I have no problem just plugging him in there. Like on DraftKings, he's 4,300. Everybody else is 41, 4,000, 38. So, he does have the best power by far, like Nick was saying. So he's definitely in play. But I think I'm a little bit higher on Moustakas than the rest of you guys are. I think he's in a pretty good spot here. $4,000. He actually hits pretty well against right-handed pitchers. He had a 353 WOBA against them last year. 360 is kind of the threshold where I consider somebody, a good hitter and somebody I want to target. So he's a little bit below it. But I got to be honest with you guys. I mean, maybe it's just me from reading the New York papers around here, where I'm from. I really don't feel like Harvey's 100%. So I don't expect him to go out there and go 7 dominant innings of, 2 hits, shutout baseball with 12 or 13 strikeouts. KC doesn't strike out a lot anyway. They put the ball in play. The Mets got some new pieces in the infield, so it always takes a little while for double plays to, come together and for guys to really get on the same page. I kind of have a feeling that this game's going to be high scoring on both sides. So I really like, Mike Moustakas. I think I probably like him more than everybody else here.
No, I'm with you. The more I'm looking at this, I kind of think Matt Harvey not 100% against an offense that's going to put the ball in play against him. I don't think their defense is great. I mean, I think this could be like a 6-inning, 5-earned run type Matt Harvey before he gets on one of those rolls that we're accustomed to. I'm with you. I mean, Donaldson, by the numbers, I mean, even though it's not his favorite in the split, he's still about 380 in terms of weighted on base. I mean, he's a monster. But I do think Mike Moustakas has the much better matchup. So I'm with you. I'm starting to believe in this Royals, lineup. I'm starting to look at, DraftKings and put together something, and I've got a few Royals in there. I'm with you. But let's move on to shortstop. Another ugly position. Now that I click and see the names, does anyone have any insight? The names that are at the top of my list. First of all, none of them are expensive, really, besides Tulowitzki. We've got Asdrubal Cabrera, Goins, Tejada, Kong's hurt, Brad Miller. Do any of these names do anything for you, or is this just another position where you're going to fill it in last? Let's go to you, Nick.
Yeah, I think I would have actually considered Ruben Tejada for a little bit, but he's hurt now, so I think Jed Jerko is going to get the start at shortstop for the Cardinals. And then just another spot how I talked about with Donaldson, I think I'm just going to plug in Tulowitzki because he's not that expensive, really. He's $3,600 on FanDuel. He's obviously the best hitter out of the bunch that's available for our pickings here, but I'm just plugging in Tulowitzki and just hoping this Jays offense just goes off against Archer.
Yeah, so let's update
There's
on the
just
injuries.
nothing at shortstop.
Yeah. So Tejada's hurt, and so is Peralta probably for half the year. So then it's got to be Jerko by default. Is there anything else here, Benny, at the shortstop position?
I mean, I'm actually willing to take a flyer on Tulowitzki just because he's, the same reasoning that we were using on the last position with Donaldson at third base. You know that the guy does have some power. You've actually seen him do it before. I don't know that there's any other, guys here that I can really see hitting home runs. Jerko has a little bit of home run power. I guess you can get a little bit out of Asdrubal Cabrera too. But, I mean, these aren't guys that I really want to pay for. So if I'm going to pay $3,700 for one of those guys, I'd rather pay $3,700 for Tulo because at least I've seen him do it before.
Yeah, Collacchi, let's go to you. I mean, the only other name I see that's even remotely viable is Alcides Escobar. If he's in, but he's the same price as Tulowitzki. So do we have to go Tulowitzki?
Yeah, I think between those two, you have to go with the guy that has that upside. But I just wanted to mention two other guys here, just because those other guys we had talked about are in tough positions. Yorko, of course, has a tough matchup against Liriano, but he does have some decent numbers against lefties. Last year, he had a 349 WOBA and an isolated power rating of 164, so that's not too bad. But Liriano is one of the better pitchers in baseball, of course, in terms of missing bats. But the other guy here I think could be one of the ways to go different in your GPPs with a small slate is actually Brad Miller against Marcus Stroman. Of course, Stroman is a decent pitcher, but he doesn't have a huge sample size in his career as he just pitched for just over a year in terms of work. And Brad Miller last year had a 348 WOBA and an isolated power of almost 200 against righties. He is hitting towards the bottom of that lineup, which is definitely something that we don't normally like to target. But in a slate like this, you got to be a little bit different. You might have to take a few chances. So I think Miller is going to find his way into a lineup or two of mine.
There you go. And finally, we're going to get to an interesting position, actually. Outfield is by far the one that I like the most on this slate. I think that everyone's going to look at the Mets, right? I think that's where we're going to start in this conversation, is the lefty Mets against Edinson Volquez and probably even Cespedes too. Conforto and Granderson, who have those split favorabilities, I think those are going to be cash staples for a lot of people. So, A, why don't you tell me if that's the way you're going, Nick, and B, how can we be different then, knowing that pretty much the whole world is going to be on these Mets?
Yeah, I think I'm locking Granderson in for sure. It's both cash for me. But to be different, I think people are kind of sleeping on Randall Grichuk a little bit. His splits last year were more favorable against righties, but I've seen this dude match lefties before. And this dude's like a Greek god. He's dominating spring training. He has been just hitting balls out over left field fence all day long. But at 2,600, I think he's 2,600 on FanDuel. I think a definite salary saver at the position, hitting in the heart of the order for the Cardinals against a lefty. So it's a favorable righty-lefty matchup. He should be hitting cleanup, I think. So he's going to be the catalyst of the Cardinals offense this season.
What about you, Benny? You're going with the Mets. Is it Granderson the top option? Is it Conforto? Who is, or maybe both of them? Which ones do you like for cash?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, I like all the Mets outfielders. Granderson leading off against the righty, definitely something you want to look at. Conforto is probably going to be one of the better salary savers that you can have, and I don't even hate Cespedes, who had a pretty good WOBA against right-handed pitching late in the year last season as well. So all three of those guys are in play. They're going to be in cash. But there are some other guys. For Pittsburgh, Andrew McCutcheon, he's got a 376 WOBA and a 200 ISO score against right-handed pitching. It's not his preferred split, but he's a good player, and he can also hit right-handed pitching as well. And he actually has a really good DVP against Wainwright. Over his career, he's gotten a lot of hits off Wainwright. Hasn't been easy for Wainwright to get him out. So I think he's somebody you can look at. Agree with Nick's call on Randall Gierchuk. I mean, he was a guy we were using last year. His salary was cheap. He has that home run upside. He can hit 2 dongs in a game for you. I mean, he is a legit power source, so he's going to be somebody who's kind of cheap. Also think you could probably look at Matt Holliday as well. Holliday's always hit left-handed pitching pretty well. He had bad stats last year, so if you're only somebody who looks at 2015, you're not going to realize it. But you go back and look at his 2014 stats, he had a 435 WOBA against left-handed pitching. So he's always been one of those guys that hits left-handed pitching really well. And then, again, like I said before, the only guy who really hits right-handers well on Toronto, Kevin Kiermaier. He may even find himself leading off here if Jaso's not in. He's going to be very low-owned and is a guy that has some pop and can get on base, can even steal a base for you. And then the guys on the Blue Jays are always in play as well. I mean, you could look at a guy like Joey Bats. His power plays anywhere. Chris Colabello had a huge season last year. He's pretty cheap, probably going to be hitting 5th or 6th in that order this year, so I think he's somebody else you can look at. So there are some other options. And then even on the Royals, who we didn't talk about, Alex Gordon is back and healthy. He has outfield eligibility still on some sites. I think he's a guy that you can look at there. And then if you're playing on the site where some sites actually have Kendry Morales with outfield eligibility, even though he either DHs or plays first, but they give him outfield eligibility in some places so that you can play him there. I think he's a guy that you can look at there as well. So definitely think there are other options outside the Mets, but I do agree that the Mets are kind of the chalky one.
Yeah, let's go to you, Collacchi, and I'm just going to lead in with that I think that Corey Dickerson is going to be a tournament option because people are going to look at his splits, and they are huge. I've got his home and away for his career. He hits 355 in Coors. He hits 249 everywhere else. Let's go to slugging percentage, 675 in Coors, 410 everywhere else. So these are monster. This is over 3 years. Mind you, they were injury-plagued. But, I mean, Dickerson's still going to be hitting in the middle of the lineup for the Rays against a righty. You like the lefty-righty split for him, so I think he's tournament worthy. Do you agree with that, and do you have any other names or guys that stand out for you? Because I think he's a guy that I think I'm immediately going to try and get ahead of the curve on.
Yeah, Dickerson was a guy that I did have mentioned here, and I'm glad you talked about his numbers. His last year he had a 398 WOBA and a ridiculous 280 isolated power rating against left-handed pitching, or right-handed pitching, rather. But the one thing about that, like Ricky said, most of those statistics came in Coors Field. He's not playing for the Rockies anymore, unfortunately, for DFS players. But he's still a decent hitter, so I don't think you can expect those kind of splits again. But in the middle of that order, and he's very cheap, although you don't necessarily need too much value in this slate, he is a guy to take a look at. But I wanted to touch on Cespedes. I think a lot of people know that he's a big right-handed power hitter, and you assume that he's excellent against lefties and decent against righties. This guy has been a reverse splits hitter pretty much his entire career. And what I mean by that is he actually fares better against right-handed pitching rather than left-handed pitching. Now, basically, this is due to the loop he has in his swing. He's one of the only right-handed hitters that has an uppercut swing, sort of like a lot of left-handed hitters. So it's a little bit interesting to look at. But his isolated power rating last year for the Mets against righties, 318. That's good for first in the MLB over a course of a long season. So that's a ridiculous number for power in that order against the number one pitcher to target this week or this slate. I think this is definitely a guy you should just plug and play in your lineups, and I do expect him to be the chalk.
Yeah, there's two names that I think interest me a lot for tournaments as well. Gregory Polanco, if he's leading off, but I'm not sure where he's going to be. It's going to be between him and Jaso, I think, to lead off against Adam Wainwright. But I'm interested in those lefties against Wainwright. I'm not sure if he's 100%. He just gave up 4 earned runs in 4 innings in spring, and I know we don't put much into spring, but I think those could be options where people aren't looking against Wainwright, and maybe he's not fully right yet. And the other guy I liked was Kevin Pillar. Who I think people, they're going to look for the big bats. But sneakily last year, Kevin Pillar put together 12 homers, 25 steals. I don't have the 76 runs as well. So he was kind of a sneaky source of lower end production just simply for being a part of that, lineup. And I think people are going to focus on Batista, Encarnacion, Tulowitzki. And if you're going with that stack, Martin's numbers don't favor hitting against righties. So I think Pillar could be, a nice fill-in instead. Does anyone have anything else to say about outfield?
Yeah, did we talk about Stephen Piscotty at all?
We mentioned on him in first base because he's got dual eligibility on DraftKings, but not really for outfield.
Oh, okay.
But go ahead.
Yeah, he caught my eye on outfield. I think he's going to bat second for the Cardinals, and he crushed lefties last year. He hit 322 average. Let me see his WOBA here. 376 WOBA and 186 ISO and 141 runs created plus. So, I mean, he's definitely in a great spot against a lefty. But I mean, we know Liriano does well. He strikes guys out. It's the lowest total of the Sunday game. So it's not a great spot, but I think he can come and play in tournaments, especially with his lineup spot hitting second.
So let's talk general strategy. It sounds like if you guys are like me, if we're building, let's say we use multiple tournament rosters, are we going to kind of focus on the same infielders, at least at, second, third, catcher kind of thing, and then differentiate in the outfield? Does that seem like the way to get it done on this slate in tournaments, or do you have a different idea? Let's go to you, Collacchi.
Yeah, the thing for this slate, of course, is there aren't too many infielders to choose from. So I do think that would be an excellent way to target your tournament lineups, especially if you multi-enter with a similar core. So if you do want to use Liriano, he's your guy at pitching, or if you do want to use Stroman or another guy, just kind of plug him in, pick those infielders you like because there really aren't too many to target, and then that's how you mix it up. Mix it up with your outfield a little bit. Of course, you have guys like McCutchen, Lorenzo Cain's even out there, Jose Batista, and we mentioned Cespedes and the rest of those Mets outfielders. So if you're going in a direction where you're putting multiple lineups in, which in a small slate like this, I would suggest in terms of doing that rather than playing big volume and cash on the first day of the season. I think that is the way to go, simply because there just are more options in the outfield.
There you go. Let's move on to bold calls. That's kind of our thing, but we can do it for both. We can do both bold calls for the first games, the first set of games on Sunday, and for the season, because I think that's going to make it interesting. Because we're just talking about 3 games here. We've kind of nailed it. We beat the horse to death and then continued beating him. So let's go with one bold call for the slate and one bold call for the season. I'll start. I'm going to go with the homer pick. I'll go Chris Bryant, NL MVP. Why wouldn't I go with that? And for this slate, I'm going to go for bold calls that I think Matt Harvey gives up 7 earned runs. I think he gets smoked, and you'll want to use that Royals lineup. Let's go to you, Benny. Let's go bold calls for both the season and for just this slate.
Okay, bold calls for the season. 2 of my favorite players for the entire season, once again, are going to be Matt Carpenter and Cesar Hernandez. And I think that playing Matt Carpenter and Cesar Hernandez every day in cash will win you money for the rest of the season. That's my bold call. And then my bold call for this slate, I kind of agree with you that Harvey's going to get lit up. And I think that one of the guys who's going to fly under the radar at less than 5% ownership, who's going to have a huge day against Matt Harvey, is going to be Kendrys Morales. So he's going to be a guy that I have on all my tournament teams because he's somebody that I think is going to be very low owned and has upside and is in a pretty solid matchup here.
Nick, let's go to you. What kind of boldness you got for us today?
Yeah, I'll go with Randall Grichuk hits 30 home runs this season. That's my bold call for the year. And then I'll take Ludus Duda double dongs on Sunday.
There you go. Not 1, but 2 homers for Lucas Duda. Collacchi, what do you got for us? I assume it's not Charlie Blackmon winning the NL MVP.
It's not Charlie Blackmon. But my bold call for the slate is going to be Yoenis Cespedes hits 2 home runs over 425 feet. Now, I think that is not necessarily a call that everybody's going to be like, oh, wow, Cespedes 2 bold calls, but whatever. Now, for the season, though, I'm looking at Gio Gonzalez to have 15 wins and an ERA below 2.7. And I'll tell you why. Last season, he had the highest BABIP of any pitcher in the MLB at over 350. I think it was 351. Now, that to me indicates the guy's really just giving up a lot of hits when the ball's in play, because that's what BABIP means. Now, this guy had a really low ground ball rate, a really low line drive rate, and didn't give up a lot of fly balls. So he was unlucky. So for me, that indicates progression. Gio Gonzalez, 15 wins, 2.75 ERA.
Yeah, I wanted to go with one more because I remember Nick and I talking about it on Twitter, but I really think Bryce Harper is the best player in the world, and I think he showed it last year, and I think this is going to be a ridiculous season from Harper where he goes 300, 100 runs, 50 homers, 100 RBIs, and 10 steals. I think Bryce Harper is, if you're in your fantasy drafts projecting, Mike Trout's been the guy the last few years, I think you're going to be sadly mistaken this year because I think Harper is just a once-in-a-lifetime type talent, and I really believe in this kid. All right. It's 4:51, I guess 5:51. We have gone through and exhausted the slate. What more tidbits do you guys have for us? Maybe some words of advice for some daily fantasy players that we haven't gotten to on this podcast so far. I'll go to you, Josh.
The first thing I can say is for those that redo their own research, and I know a lot of you do because that's half the fun in DFS, be sure to use big sample sizes at the beginning of the season. If you see a guy that's 7 for 10 against lefties in the first 2 weeks, that is not sustainable. So be sure to use last year's stats or even the previous 3 years as well. The higher the sample size, the better the data you're going to get. So that's the biggest piece of advice I can give you guys for earlier in the season.
Yeah, and I just got linked, by the way, that Rays lineup for opening day. We got Forsythe, Morrison, Longoria, Dickerson, Jennings, who actually is a little interesting now, Miller, Souza, Kiermaier, Conger is the opening day lineup. So Conger did make it. He's hitting 9th, though, which I guess for catcher doesn't even really matter for the opening slate. You're going to have to use someone, so it doesn't – I mean, I prefer guys in the top 6, and we'll probably get to that on a future podcast. I like guys at the top of the order, but this is pretty brutal slate. Benny, why don't you give one more final word of advice for those just trying out daily baseball?
Yeah, I think a lot of the stuff that we talk about and like the good plays and when we say the guys who are going to be chalk, those are the guys that you want in a cash game lineup. The way that I like to play MLB for tournaments is know who the cash guys are, know who the chalk guys are, know who the guys that are in the best spots, and then don't listen to yourself and play the complete opposite. So, for example, on a slate like this that it's kind of small, if you want to win a tournament, you have to do something different than everybody else. So if everybody else is going to be using Francisco Liriano, they're not going to be using hitters from the St. Louis Cardinals against them. So if you're looking to try to find some low-owned guys to throw into your lineup, looking at the hitters on the Cardinals who are going to be going up against the guy who's going to be likely the highest-owned pitcher, those guys are probably going to be very low-owned. So if one of them does have a big game, if Matt Carpenter happens to go lefty-lefty home run, or Randall Gierchuk hits 2 bombs in this game or something like that, you're probably going to get this guy at a lower ownership than you normally would because everybody's using the pitcher that's going up against them. So for tournaments, when you're trying to think differently than everybody else, think about what everybody's going to be doing, and then by doing the exact opposite, by definition, you're going to wind up getting guys that are very low-owned. So that's a good way to kind of differentiate your roster. Now, I'm not saying go and stack the St. Louis Cardinals. That's not a good idea. But if you're looking for 1 or 2 guys to give you something different, I think that's a good way to go about it.
I think that's a great point, and just want to touch on that quickly, is that this is the best sport to be contrarian in. I mean, when you have, let's say, in the NBA, you've got Russell Westbrook against the Sacramento Kings team, and for whatever reason there's a 4-point spread. I mean, he's going to get it done 9.5 9.9 out of 10 times against them. But in baseball, you put one of the best hitters against a pitcher that he should crush, and he gets it done 3.5 times out of 10 times. So there is a big margin for failure in baseball, and people just don't realize that. That you've got this great hitter in a great matchup against a bad pitcher. Well, he still has less than 40% chance of success each time up, and it's very possible they go 0 first. So this is a great sport to be contrarian in, even more than the other ones, because there are matchups in basketball where you can't miss this guy. You've got to use him. And for baseball, there really, isn't. There's just as much of a chance for them to fail as there is to succeed. So,
Yeah.
Nick, do you have any more pieces of advice?
I was just going to say the exact same thing you did. Just any guy, the greatest player on the planet can go for 4 any given night. So I just don't. This isn't a sport where you have to chase the chalk at all.
Exactly. I still remember the night where last season where I was top 5 in a Playboy contest for FanDuel, and I needed Troy Tulowitzki at the end of the night, and I think he was 0 for at the point, and he hits a bomb, and Mike Trout robs a homer, and the guy ends up 0 for 4, and I didn't need that much from him. And it was Mike Trout against a bad pitcher on it was Tulowitzki against a bad pitcher on the Angels. I think he was on Colorado at the time. But, it's just, even if you're going into, the end of the night feeling good about a good hitter, there's no guarantee whatsoever in baseball, which is what makes it such a crazy sport. And also why when I go to Vegas, I always bet the underdogs, by the way. I think it's a great sport to do that because, you never know when a bullpen's going to blow up or crazy things happen in baseball, which is why they play 162 games. But I think that's all we got tonight, unless anyone has anything else to say. We should reiterate that there is a free roll coming up on Monday for MLB. If the MLB tools are not up yet on RotoCurve, does anyone check that out? Are they up yet?
They will be up very shortly. We're working on a page, but we have a ton of stuff ready for the season. Of course, the MLB splits page is something you guys should definitely check out. It has every hitter and their splits against the handedness of pitcher they're facing, and every pitcher and which you're going against, and it gives you their stats against that handedness of pitcher. So honestly, 90% of your research is going to be right there on an MLB splits page.
There you go. Nick, I have a question for you. Is FanDuel doing the Sunday slate? I was just looking. It doesn't look like it's up yet.
No, they default you to the Monday, but you just gotta click. You gotta click on tournaments and then click on Sunday.
Okay, so I was just double checking for that because I know some other sites got some big things going on. Fantasy Draft's got the Chris Bosh going on tonight in basketball, so check those out. I know DraftKings has some big things for baseball. Let's see. Check out the MLB tools. Don't forget about the NBA. For PGA, we got Masters coming up, which is pretty cool. But until then, let's kick some ass in baseball this weekend. Let's make it a good first slate, and we'll be back on Monday to talk the real opening day.